Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tammy Cumming, co-host of Web Byte series, and I serve as the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness for the City University of New York's Brooklyn College.
And I'm the co-host, David Miller, and I'm from the University of Florida, where I'm a professor in research and evaluation methods. And I'm also the director of the School of Human Development and Organizational Studies in Education.
And hello, I'm Isana Leshchinskaya. I am a producer on the Web Byte series, and I work with Dr. Tammy Cumming at the City University of New York, Brooklyn College in the Office of Educational Research and Assessment.
And I wanted to welcome you back. We're in 2023. We're actually have been doing this for 4 years, and I wanted to say that it's been a real fun run. We won the Apex Award for Excellence for our Web Byte series. And I want to thank particularly Isana as the lead producer for all the work that she's done on this over the last 4 years.
We're changing this up just a little for our launch episode in our 4th year. So as many of you know, David and I have really branched out into diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I'm proud to announce that it's been recognized by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And in thinking about a great way to start off this season, we brought together 2 people who are outside of education. We're broadening the horizons, we're cutting down the silos, and we're going to talk about DEI, civics, and multicultural understanding and how we can bring this all together before we get going on a great season. So we hope you'll join in and join us for future episodes, but particularly enjoy this one. It's a pretty special one. Thanks, everyone. It's an honor to welcome our guest, Richard Dreyfuss, who is an Oscar-winning actor. And I think most impressively is he's a scholar. He's done an extensive work. He founded the Dreyfuss Civics initiative. I think this work is so important, particularly during this time in our nation and in the world. It's an honor to have you here, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
I also want to introduce Stephen Daldry, who is a Tony and Emmy Award winning director and Oscar nominated. And he is a strong advocate for human rights, particularly among refugees and underrepresented groups. And he is a highly civics-minded individual, so it's a pleasure to have him here today.
Thanks, David. Nice to be here.
So, Stephen, I thought if we can start with you, if you can talk about how do you think that you and the work that you've been doing, how can we change perceptions about refugees and improve cultural understanding? And in formulating your answer, if you think a little bit about how affecting these changes could be enhanced through civics education.
I think that I always have great difficulty talking about myself as an artist, but just in terms of creating work, I try to create work that has a civic engagement at every level. One of the great pieces we're doing at the moment is about it's called Little Amal, and she's a puppet, and we are traveling, and she's been traveling from Syria to the UK, and she's right now traveling across America. She's called Little Amal, and she's 12 foot high, and she's a puppet, and she's a young Syrian refugee who is traveling across 35 different cities in the United States. She's in St. Louis right now as we're talking. She's in Chicago yesterday, and this is possibly one of the largest open air celebrations, festivals, if you like, public art events that the America's ever seen. And it's around a refugee. And what we're trying to do in this project is engage people in the conversation about immigration, about refugees, and it's asking a simple question. If a 10-year-old girl, in this case, it's a rather large puppet, but if a 10-year-old girl who's looking for a mother arrived in your city or town, how would you welcome her? And what is the notion of how would you welcome a refugee in your town? In a sense, it's trying to create Amal is her name, which is Arabic for hope. And it's trying to bring people of goodwill together to understand the notion of what a refugee or what immigration is, And she's traveling 6,000 miles across America, but she's already traveled from Syria right the way across Europe in a response, if you like, to the great migration crisis of 2015, when 1 million people traveled from Syria during the war to Europe. And how did Europe cope with this huge influx of people? I say that because it's so important, because the crisis of migration, the crisis of refugees is just beginning. The climate emergency that we're in is only going to get worse. And however big the walls we build, however big we try to restrict people coming, they will be coming. There is this huge wave of people that are about to arrive on our shores, already arriving on the shores of Europe. And it's splitting Europe. So it's about how you develop a conversation. And Little Amal, this little art event that we're creating, actually a huge art event, is really trying to be a catalyst for a conversation. And most of that conversation happens in schools. And the school conversation that we're trying to engender, trying to make sure happens, is what actually is our civic responsibility? What is the role of government? What is the rule of law? What do we have? And I think right now across America, a country that I live in, as much as I live in the United Kingdom, the question is, how well do people understand the laws of the land? How do people understand civic government? How do people engage with the act of democracy? How do we understand what, if you like, a crisis like immigration? But if you don't know your past and you don't know your present, how on earth can you know your future? How do you put this? And it's not just about educating on civic responsibility, it's about history. It's about how we create schooling that allows people to engage in what, if there is a crisis, and the crisis will be, in my particular case, it'll be about immigration and about refugees. How do we engage people so that they're not instantly put into the fear factor, that we're not polarized straight away, that people are not denied the opportunity to speak about their own concerns, the concerns of the refugees, that we don't polarize people into the fear factor. And I do understand that in America it's very complicated because the news outlets are giving news, and they're not obliged to give in any way a balanced view of a situation. The news outlets are against this the process of discourse, the discourse of people of goodwill coming together to discuss the subject of the land. And if the subject in my case is refugees, is immigration, and particularly in America, where the whole basis of the country is based on immigration, that obviously there is the diversity of America is its strength and its basis. So how do we begin to have that conversation at a time of mass migration? And the migration that's happening is just beginning. So these waves and waves are about to engage with us. What I'm interested in is this education program, which is vast. And I believe that we're doing it well. And it's new that you can actually start engaging thousands and thousands of school children in just a simple question of what is a refugee? What is immigration? How do we engage with, what are their rights? What is the law of the land? What is immigration rights? So that they start believing and trusting what is the civic responsibility, the civic laws that are laid down. And if you don't even have any knowledge of those laws, if you have no knowledge of the history of America, then no sense of what society, how society is ruled. What I love about Richard's work in all his in his book, particularly his new book, is actually making sure that people are the schools, the central tenet of civic responsibility is taught in school. If you don't teach that, and if you don't teach what is democracy, if you don't teach the rule of law, if you don't teach how you can change things, if you don't teach how your society is governed, you get into these polarized conversations really quickly because people don't understand how the society holds itself together. I'm a huge fan of Richard's work, and it's a real joy and pleasure to meet you on this Zoom. And Richard will talk for himself about why America, and I have to say the United Kingdom, where I am right now, the lack of teaching of civic responsibility in schools is a tragedy, but it's more than a tragedy, it's a disaster for what's about to come.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. And this civic responsibility, of course, is absolutely important to everything we should be doing. And it's good to hear about the work that you'll be doing with that. I know that as an educator, I know that a lot of this civic responsibility needs to begin in the schools. It needs to be thought about where we start with our children, and it's at a very early age in the schools. And I do think that's a very important thing. And yet, when I look at what's going on right now in schools, I'm not sure I'm seeing enough of that clearly. I mean, one of the things we note is that national assessment has actually, for the first time, they've been testing civics for education since 1998, every 4 years. And the last cycle was the first time where we actually have decreases in the number of children who have basic knowledge of civics and civic responsibility. So I know this is a very important thing. And that's why I was very glad, Mr. Dreyfuss, to actually see that the work that you're proposing and that you're working on, and the great things you're doing. And so what I'd love to do is just hear more about what you're hoping that the Dreyfuss Civics initiative and your work in this area is going to be, where the direction it's going to be moving with this.
Well, yes, I can do some of that. I think I wrote this book because I was really quite angry, and I hope that anger seeped into the book itself. I've been speaking about the removal of civics, the lack of civics, the theft of civics for 30, 40 years. And I have seen the faces of the people I was speaking to, and this outrage begins to take over their features. And I know that outrage disappears before they reach their cars. And what I'm trying to do is get people angry, and how do I get them to stay angry? How do I get them to move towards action? I think one of the most important things that has to be defined is the goal sought by the founders and reiterated by many of the people who ran education in America. Here's one important fact. The revolution that caused us to have independence from the British Empire was the loudest noise on the planet Earth at the time. It was not something done in secret. It was something done very, very loudly. And emperors and kings and monarchs and aristocracies all over the world knew that was to be feared. That if this experiment happening in North America actually worked, it meant that education of the poorest of Earth's inhabitants could really make a difference. And that if we treated the poor with the same energy and the same enthusiasm, and said, we will teach you exactly as the monarch was taught, and no breakdown of everyone from from parents, from fathers and daughters, and everyone was allowed to think that there could actually be a new beginning in the minds of all the young boys and girls, and nothing would keep them from achieving the most informed generation of children that had ever been anywhere, because the poor were not being dismissed or being treated differently just for the past 5 years. It was 5,000 years that the poor was denied education and the ability to read and write, and the ability to do sums, and the ability to be mobile and move if they wanted to move. They were held in slavery. We didn't call them slaves until we did, and then we risked our entire governmental theory on the notion that these people could be improved to the point of a miracle. And
But
they knew.
Richard, I'd like to ask you, why do you think the education system right now in America, at all levels, but particularly, state level, why do people not take civic, and I'm talking not about just civic responsibility or civic studies, but the notion of democracy, the origins of democracy, what you're talking about in terms of the American Revolution, what the ideals were, the Enlightenment, why is that not taught vigorously within American schools as an example of the basis of America, as opposed to anywhere else in the world? Because the ideals and the dreams you're talking about seem to me that the problem about teaching democracy is that people don't teach the dream of America.
Because America has meaning in this world. Because America said loudly and clearly that there was a true equality of potential.
And opportunity.
And an opportunity. One of my favorite phrases is that we allowed the opportunity to have opportunity.
Yeah.
And that was completely new. Until then, the only people who had crossed the Atlantic were pirates and empires of zealots and thieves and capitalists. And that's it. But no one, until the poor thought of it, had to decide what to do with their children, because the majority of ships that crossed from America back to Europe foundered and sank, and the treasure ships first.
Of course. But the dream of welcome, the dream of allowing people from whatever background to come to America and flourish and to be equal under the law and under the Constitution. That idea, which is the core idea of America, is not taught. Is that people aren't being taught what you call in your book, what I would call civic responsibility. In other words, what is the notion of American democracy, which is, you can argue all sorts of things have gone wrong, but the pure ideal of it, the rule of law, what the law does, how the Constitution works, the basis of the country is not taught in schools. And that what we're seeing, it is taught in schools, but we can talk about why
it's not.
No,
Really not.
There's only 18 states. I just was reading a study from National Center on Educational Statistics. Only 18 states incorporate and have an actual test, and only Civics test, which means it has to be taught in some way. And then only eight of those require it for graduation. And what was interesting is most of the states that do have this, they don't talk about the curriculum. So Richard, you through the Dreyfuss Initiative have a lot of recommendations on a curriculum. And I have to say, I did purchase your book, One Thought Scares Me, and Stephen got a copy of that for Christmas. So he has read it and is familiar with this work. But what they're doing in the majority of the 18 states is what they're administering a test very similar to the test that immigrants would have to take in order to become a citizen in the United States. And given the immigration crisis we're seeing, I know you spoke a lot about this, Stephen, that you're seeing in Europe, but here in the United States, and I'm in New York City, I'm seeing it for myself when I walk down the street, if I'm in Midtown Times Square. But throughout the nation, you're in California, Richard, what we're seeing in the southern border states, it's a problem, and we have to come together and figure out how to have civil conversations, but people don't understand the foundations. They don't understand how the government works. So I think this conversation is really, really important. And
I think it's
according
more important, Tammy, given the fact that we get news not as a means of discourse, not as a means of suggestion, but a means of encouraging whatever point of view you currently have. You can find a news outlet which is tell you what you want to think. So we're not getting news in the way that when I was being brought up, we would, oh, I see, there's 2 points of view. There's no 2 points of view, there's 1 point of view. And it's that, the dividing line, to stop people talking, to stop people understanding. But most important, Richard, from what your book is saying, is to stop people understanding the dream of America, why America is important, what its soul is. And if you don't teach that, if that isn't part of the core curriculum for everybody, not just people who've been here a long time, but people who just arrived, then it's hard for people to engage in a conversation about what the country could be, should be, might be.
Yep.
I was saddened to find out that when I looked at the data that less than 1 in 4 eighth graders are proficient in civics. Less than 1 in 4.
It's because we're not getting the curriculum. Richard said they're not getting it in school.
Right.
And I can't imagine that of all the subjects to be cut out of a curriculum, that they would cut out the reason that we had the war to begin with.
Exactly.
The reason that made us different than any other group. It beggars the imagination to think that that was just a coincidence. What made America America was civic authority. And
I think that's a really great thing to say, Richard, and it's so true. And it does seem to me to be bizarre that the premise of America is not taught. The premise of, and it's not an academic study. It's a romantic study. It's an important study on the ideals, the hopes, and the history of the country. Not as a history lesson, but as a means and as a tool by which we can define the country that we live in, and dream again. Without that, we can't dream.
Well, if we don't dream it again, if we continue to act out of denial and indifference, if we continue that, we won't have too much to worry about past the next 30 years, because we are in the end game right now, and we are playing with the end of America being America. And that's as starkly as I can put it. No one who understands the concepts involved could possibly want a stupid public that does not know the Constitution of the United States.
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole reason we wanted to have this conversation and kind of bringing it all back together. And thank you for the note, Richard, because it's definite. We're going to demand that people read the book, One Thought Scares Me, and we hope they'll consider that advice. And David and I, in our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm surprised we're still having those conversations. There's been dialogue around this for decades. People have forgotten the founding principles. They need to be taught this in the schools. Stephen, they need to have a multicultural understanding of, you know, what has to happen to deal with the migration situation in Europe, in America. It exists throughout the world. And I think you're right. We're at a critical juncture, Richard, in our nation. This is the experiment. We hope that it's not going to be a failed experiment. I happen to be optimistic that we can turn this around because these conversations will happen. David, I know that you have a lot of thoughts about this. I wish we could go on and on and on for hours, and I welcome you both back. We would love to continue this if we could get the scheduling. I know we have to thank our producer here on this, our lead producer, who was able to get us all together from the West Coast, East Coast, and then in London. But I think it's been a very meaningful first start, at least with this group, in having the conversation and understanding we need to have civil discourse when we're having opposing points of view. We can't have actions like the insurrection that we saw on January 6th. We cannot have in this country two parties that are so politically opposed that they can't even come together, be in the same room without the stories that you were telling, the olden days where we should have evolved, where we don't have to resort to scalping someone to give as a reward. Things have changed. We should be able to do things diplomatically and not harm other human beings in the process, and make our world a better evolved place to live for all human beings. Doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Those things are important. So I thank you both so much for it. I know, Stephen, you've got to get back. A little plug. The Crown, one of our favorite shows on Netflix, the 6th season. I'm sorry that it's coming to an end. You have a new play coming out on the West End based on Netflix's hit show, Stranger Things. And I cannot wait. That opens in December of this year. So I know you were at rehearsal today before you joined us. It's quite late for you in London. So thank you for staying on with us. I think
Give me a job and I'll be in London shooting that and continue the conversation.
That's
Hey,
awesome.
Richard, you got to come and visit.
Yes.
Yeah,
You
I'm
honestly,
not kidding.
we talk.
I have to go because the show about Jaws is based upon a very painful lie, and I'm going to go and clarify that lie.
Right.
And,
Let's be at the opening of the new show in the West End in December. We'll all be there.
Lovely.
And David, I'll give you closing comments before we have to wrap for today.
I just want to thank you both for coming in. This has been a great conversation. It's a conversation that we all need to be involved in. It's a conversation that I hear a sense of urgency that's absolutely should be there. And these are definitely directions we need to be moving in. And I want to just thank you for taking the time to do this with us, to walk us down this journey.